Hello everybody and welcome to the Creator Space Online. We're back for some more online workshops and today we will be doing digital post-processing. So thanks again for joining us. It's always a pleasure to see everyone virtually. Just a reminder, this is recorded, so right after this it's going to be available on the same link through this Vimeo link. So just you can sit back, enjoy, and any questions, we'll have some chat time as well. So the chat is open. You can put in any Q&A, questions as we go. I'll be sure to answer that, or at least I can address it, and I'll put my email up as well after. So really great to be able to do this. So once again, my name is Tom Strand. I'm the lead digital artist of the Creator Space project. I just want to thank all our partners in this project. So we have the Canada Council for the Arts, then we have our library partners. So we have the Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. So at these three library partners, you can access digital arts equipment and digital arts computers. And the computers are really what's key when it comes to talking about post-processing. So, if you have, let's say, an older computer or laptop, and you want to have something that has more memory and processing power and faster hard drives, we have all of this equipment available for public access. So if you're a member at any of those three libraries, or if you have any if you're in related libraries, that you can access those libraries as well. We'd love for you to check out the digital arts computers. So there's iMac computers loaded with the Affinity creative software. Today we'll be looking at Affinity Photo, and then also there's a Designer and Adobe Publisher, Affinity Publisher, sorry. So they're just like the Adobe product. So it's just like Photoshop, Illustrator, and that's the whole idea, is that you can do the same concept. So Publisher is just like InDesign, the Designer is like Illustrator, and Affinity Photo is like Photoshop. And so these are all loaded on the iMac, so you can use them there. And then we also have the Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve editing software that has one of the most powerful color grading tools, and that's really what post-processing is about when it comes to video. So the cool thing is that when you start to look at post-processing in the digital sphere and the digital world, it's really very similar to when you're doing photographic images and you're doing video images. And the cool thing is that many of us might not even realize it, but just if you've been doing things, let's say social media, Instagram, you are already post-processing a lot of the time. So when you add filters, when you're adjusting your photos, so you take a photo on your phone and then you start adding some more color, you start you make it black and white, you put different filters on it. That is essentially post-processing. So most of us are already doing this in a regular daily occurrence, and it's then you start to go, okay, well these are kind of predetermined or available presets, and you apply them, and that's great. But as digital artists and working in digital arts, we want to look at how can we do post-processing that we can control even further. So there's a blend you can use. Again, there's presets you can get, but it's also understanding what you can do yourself and being in control of that image manipulation. And that's the really cool thing. And then with that is really the power in post-processing, is that you can manipulate things to further the story. You can manipulate things to enhance what you've done. You can also fix some mistakes. And that's the beautiful thing of digital technology, is that it's a lot easier to fix little mistakes. Let's say something's in the shot that you don't want in the shot. You can get rid of things and reframe, and you can do a lot of really cool things in the post-processing world. So that's what we're going to look at today. Okay, so I would like to introduce this concept. So what is raw photography? Because I think that's really important, and this goes in video as well. So we'll hear a lot about this, raw photography. So it's basically the digital equivalent of a film negative. So in the past, you'd shoot on film negative, 35 millimeter still frames, like for photography, or even 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, Super 8, anything like that. You'd shoot on film, and then you'd have work with that, and that was like your raw negative. And then from there, you can do all the additional work, so you can change things and do that. So the idea with raw in photos and video, so this is going to apply to both. I said raw photography here, but it really applies to both, is that it provides what's really a flat negative digital image. So it's flatter in its look when you just look at it and it's on its own, and then you can develop it into more of the look that you want. So that Post-processing and that taking the raw image, and applying settings to it, manipulating it, is really what's the same idea as like when you used to have a negative and then you'd get the photos printed. There's a negative, and in the printing process, the printer has to look at the negative and figure out, give you a rough idea. So if something was a little bit bright, they try to make it a bit darker. They try to get the colors pretty neutral so that, skin tones will look natural, the elements will look natural. If it's outside in the winter, it shouldn't look green, right? So it'd be like, how do you make things look as natural as possible? So that's kind of what was happening when you'd go drop off your film and then you'd get it processed and the photos printed. But on the negative, on its own, it wouldn't look like that. It would just be flat and there's just like the information that's there. But then it's up to the printing to get that image out of there, to put the contrast, to decide kind of the color balancing and what it's going to look like in printing that negative. And that's the cool thing. That's the same kind of idea with raw photography, is that we essentially are developing it. And they're larger files, so unlike the JPEGs. And what's good about them is that they're larger, but they have the ability to have, I would almost say kind of an infinite amount of manipulation done to them, versus the JPEG one, because it already has that color information essentially baked into it. There's not as much that you can do with it. This applies also to video. So video has, the full color image or profile already baked into it, it's called. Then you can't really do as much as you can with something that's raw. So Blackmagic, the cameras that we have through our digital arts, a mobile digital arts program, our creator space program at the libraries, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras can shoot in something called Blackmagic RAW. Blackmagic RAW is just like the photo RAW, similar in that it is like a metadata, it's flat, and then it can be manipulated and changed. It can go so far as you can change the exposure, you can change the color temperature very easily. So it's basically a representation of the image at that given point, but nothing is really carved in stone, if you will. So it's kind of a capture of the image, and then you can do a lot of post-processing after, up, all the way through changing the exposure, changing the color balance. So it's a really cool technique, and that's what post-processing is really exciting to work with in those formats, because you can do a lot more. At the same time, we can still do post-processing with a regular, these baked-in images. So a regular JPEG off a phone, let's say, video files, let's say off a drone, a DJI drone or something. If you just shot it in regular mode, other cameras, again, phone cameras, photo cameras, video cameras, however those images are, we can still take those and manipulate them. So it's not a lost cause by any means. So that's a really important thing. Okay, so now what is raw photography? So let's look at the next area. So if we're looking at what's possible. So let's look at the right here with Affinity Photo. This is it's essentially, like I mentioned, an alternative to Adobe Photoshop. It's a low-cost one-time payment, and you have options for both desktop and you also have an iPad iOS version. So Affinity Photo lets you bring in the raw photos, then you can develop them, and you can post-process them and do really cool things with them. Now, the thing is with the Affinity Photo, you can access this through our library partners, so it's on all the iMacs already. So there's no need to purchase anything. You can go and check it out right there on and use the computers that are set up, that are specifically set up to do this kind of work, because it can be a little bit more taxing on your laptops and things if they're a bit older, or your home computers if they're not designed. Now, photography will be sometimes a little bit less processor and memory heavy and hungry, versus video that may require a lot more. So you might be able to still use your older computers for the photo post-processing, but when it comes to video color grading and video work, you might need to consider one of the computers at our library partners. Okay, so the history of photography, as I mentioned, is here's some a little more background on it. So the photochemical background of photography is comes essentially with 35 millimeter film rolls, 24 to 36 rolls. You take pictures, and that was the single lens reflex, so an SLR photography. We're familiar now with DSLR, so digital single lens reflex photography. So you loaded a roll, 35mm film, and then you exposed one photo at a time. You'd have 24 or 36 photos. And then the exposed film negative was developed, a chemical process, and then you get this negative. And that's essentially the raw photo that you can then use as a negative. And that works like that. So, so it's a really neat process, a very old process. And now we're getting into this really cool digital thing. So, developing film, you had the exposure, you exposed it, developer bath, stop bath, fixer bath, then you washed it, drying, and you had this negative of what was exposed. And that's it. And then from that negative is what we pull out in terms of extracting an image. So from negative to positive, we flip it around. So the negative, you can see color negative to the positive, flips around, the reverse of the colors essentially. And then like the black and white, you see like what's black in the negative is what's white in the positive, right? So it's a really cool idea of understanding what's light in the negative is dark in the print, and it is essentially negative that then becomes a positive. So it's a really, it's a cool process, an amazing process, and this is what we're trying to now do with this importing raw photos, Camera Raw or DNG and Affinity Photo, and you automatically opens up the develop persona, and in the developing you can quickly adjust things and figure out what you want to do. So you take the negative and you're manipulating it. Now the negative, the raw photos don't look like what I just showed, that negative. They're a little bit different in that idea. So it's ends up being a little bit different. It's not the same as that black and white looking negative or that really reverse thing. So it's a digital raw, right? So it's a little bit different, but the concepts are the same. That it's this negative that we can then do this printing process to and make things work better with it. So I'm just going to escape out of here. I'm going to pull up the Affinity Photo program. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm in Affinity Photo, and what I'm going to do is just open up one of these things. So this is a CR, as you'll see here. I'm just going to zoom in here. So this is a CR2, so Camera Raw. That's what that means. I'm going to double click on that. It's going to open it up, and you can see here it's in this develop mode. So it gives me all the information. It's 5,000 by 3,500 roughly pixels, 18 megapixels. It tells me the camera. So this was shot on a Canon Rebel, my own camera. And now you have all these tools here on the side. And this is the cool thing. This is where you get into the developing. And then now I can take the exposure and say, okay, do I want it brighter? The black point, do I want it to be darker? Right, so you can see here I'm making it brighter, darker in the black point, kind of shifting where the darkness goes. Overall brightness, darkness, right? So you can do that kind of manipulation. I can enhance the contrast, so make that contrast. So the contrast is really what's, the brightest, making the brightest spot as bright as possible, making the darkest spot as dark as possible. Saturation, so I can make it essentially black and white. Vibrance, how much of that type of color, the color vibrancy is there too. And then you can see here it shows up in this graph up here, and it's showing me what that's doing. See, the vibrance is kind of adjusting the mid-tones of the colors a bit to making them more vibrant. And then saturation, you can see how it's making it too saturated, and then here I'm making it black and white. And here again, the contrast, so less contrast, you can see it's getting flatter. So you can see there's less in that dark area on the left, on the top of that chart there. And then here as we go a bit darker. But this is really cool. So you can fix your exposure. So if it's a little bit underexposed, I can actually fix it in this mode. So I'm developing, fixing it. Then I can go to white balance too. I can say, okay, let's look at what kind of temperature you want. So you can see it's a bit cooler. So maybe I want it to be a lot warmer looking. Look how quickly we can change our photo. And this is really the kind of the basic elements of post-processing is this initial development, just taking things, doing some minor adjustments, nothing major, but just reworking the image so that it can be better, or that it can help better tell our story. So, you know, if I want it to be ice cold, I can really make this blue. It doesn't have to be, you know, like warm and golden as I'm showing, right? So it can go blue and different things like that. Then there's the tint, so we can, you know, kind of tint within that color. So add a little bit more magenta. And again, what you, like I've been saying before, a lot of the digital technology, what's great is what you see is what you get. And photochemically, that was always a struggle. Is that sometimes you didn't really, you know, you tried to try things, you print, oh, it didn't work out, go back, try it again. But now you really get to see, and that's the whole idea, is what you see is what you get. So if it looks blue in your post-processing, you've made it blue. If it's warmer, you've made it warmer, right? So there's no real guesswork. And that's the cool thing, is it's a real-time relationship with the process as you go. So this is the whole thing. So you can see it's broken down into exposure, enhance. Let's zoom in on this area again. So we have these areas here. We have exposure, enhance, white balance, shadows and highlights. So we can turn that one on too. Profiles. So you can kind of change the type of color profiles. That's a little bit more advanced on it. But, you know, again, the shadows, you can see the shadows. I can make them brighter, right? I can make the highlights blue more. And that's a really cool tool. Let me just zoom out and we can see how that's reacting. But you can see, so see the shadows in the trees, but I can make them also darker. So I can have a kind of a darker shadow. That looks nice. And then same with the highlights. Do I want the, you know, leaves to be golden? I can have less highlights, right? So it's kind of a flatter looking image. And that's a different play on the contrast area. But, you know, that's really neat. And then I can go up here. There's more tabs. I can go to the lens. I can change, you know, what, you know, the kind of the distortion of the lens. I can rotate the image, right? Like if I have problems with that, I can use lens profiles here, you know, doing different things like that. Details. I can do noise reduction. So I can help, you know, get rid of any kind of noise. So if I start to get kind of grain or noise from manipulation, I can do that. Tones, I can work on overall curves. So here's where you can, you know, play with this kind of curve. And then this area here is like the mid-tones. I can play a little bit down here in this, what's called the toe, and here in the highlights. You can create these like little S curves, and you know, that could be really neat. And you can see like kind of the before and after. It just puts a little bit of punch. And I kind of like that, putting a little bit of curve. You know, here's just that black and white idea, like total black and white filtration. Split toning gets into the kind of the separation of the overall tones. So that's a really neat thing. So that's all that there is. And then once we've finished this, we can, you know, once we've done what we want this to look like, let's say we're, you know, something like this, we're like, okay, that looks great. Then you go up here, I'm just going to zoom into this spot, and you hit develop. And now we have this image imported from the camera raw, and it's developed into that. Now the cool thing is, again, this is not a final. Like we're not, we haven't overridden what was done before. So we still have our camera raw. We can start again. So it's just like a piece of negative. So just that whole idea, you have the roll of negative, you can then print and change the print a million times from that one piece of negative. You can say, okay, I'm going to make a black and white print, make a sepia print, I'm going to make a high contrast print, right? I'm going to have a blue tinted print, sepia with on the brown, on the yellow, right? Different types of sepia, different black and white types, anything you want to do. A flatter print, enlarge it, you can do all this work with it. That's the same idea here, is we have that camera raw file, we import it and we develop it, and each time we can develop it a million different ways. But we still keep our original camera raw. So we can always go back to the camera raw and work on that. It's not like that it's stuck in that. So essentially when I go back to the camera raw, so here's what we've done. Now I could, you know, save this. I can say, okay, let's save this. Save as. We have the different tools that I can save, right? So photos raw, and I can say, okay, what do we want to save this as? And I'll say developed, and go save, and there we go. Okay, and now watch this again. If I go back to open, and here's that same camera raw, and we're back to the start. So there's been nothing destructive. Everything that we do, we can do again. And that's the whole thing of post-processing. So this is the essence of post-processing, of just bringing the image in, and then you can keep going from there. And then you can get into all the additional Photoshop type elements and, you know, rework it and however you want. But this is the you know, the development or the initial grading to create the natural look or to create the artistic look. That's your base. And that's really the start of your post-processing. And that's the main part of it. And that's what generally we will do. Now, the other thing we can do is, let's go here. So I have this one that's called developed, right? So look at that. Now I can do some more things. So I can say, okay, let's look at, I can do an adjustment layer, and I can, you know, do different, I can do different things like posturizing, like see like these weird like effects. So then I can do different effects. Now the cool thing is each adjustment layer goes on top. So I can again just turn these on or off as effects. So I can turn that one off, and I can say, well, let's try something else. Let's try recoloring. I'm going to go to default. So here's like a kind of a red recoloring. I can make it like this, right? Like a mint, and I can, you know, make it really dark. Maybe I want it for some sort of a background image to use, but look at what a different image that is, right? So we go there, again, back to my layers. I can turn that on or off. My original developed, and this is the next layers of post-processing where we can do these kinds of effects things as well. I can go literally to effects, and then I can look at, you know, different elements, but I can go to the styles. I can say, okay, let's make a, you know, here's this night out style, you know, different types of styles. Go to the layers here, right? So here's the thing that go to my main image, and you know, I can play with these kinds of effects layers directly in it, right? So it does stuff like this. I can do Command Z, and it takes me back out of anything that I've done. And also we can always make a copy. So I can, you know, copy this layer. I can duplicate. There we go. Just looking for the right term here. Duplicate layer, right? And then whichever layer I'm on, that's the one that I'm post-processing. So I can do this, and I can say, yeah, let's play with this, like 80s, you know, that retro 80s gel, 80s disco, you know, these kinds of things. So really quick post-processing, and that gets us back to that idea of that kind of, you know, Instagram type of filtration and that kind of post-processing. So again, everything's possible here. We can, you know, work on with the different tools, and you know, going back to layers, and then you know, we can do there's like things like the stamp tool. So I mentioned like there's all these spectacular tools that you can use to you know, to work and to change things, manipulate things. Here's like the rubber stamp, I believe it's called. So you can see here, like I can, you know, paint out this tree, and it's rubber stamping, you know, elements before, but I can essentially redraw another area and remove this tree. So, you know, how can we fix things really quickly? So I just that's the rubber stamp, and I'm just doing this quickly, but you know, you can be more precise and find different areas and work on this for hours to do a really clean job. But look at that, we just got rid of the tree, and that's great. So here it is kind of before, after, with some effects and getting rid of the tree. This is the beauty of post-processing. So again, stylizing, developing how we want the look to be, you know, what do we want it to do to help tell our story for the image, stylizing it. And then we can do some fixes like getting rid of elements, objects, things like that, and different effects. And that's what we can do. Then we can save this, and nothing is destructive. So this is in this one, I go back to, here's the first camera raw right here, ready to start again. That's the camera raw right there. So that's our photo world, and that's how that will work. So now let's jump out of here, and it's gonna jump out of here, and we're gonna open up DaVinci Resolve. So I'm just gonna get the software going. So now Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, this is now the editing software, the video editing software, and the post-processing here is all about color grading. So the term is called color grading because it's different than post-processing, but it's the same idea. So the same concepts apply: exposure, contrast, saturation, color manipulation, color shifting, color balancing, adding different effects, visual effects, and then we can also do things like cut things out. And it's a little bit more complicated in the video world because now we have video moving images, individual frames. So if there's 1,000 frames and you want to cut something out of it, you got to make sure that the 1,000 frames, if it's moving, that it's tracked, and it gets a lot more complex. So it's harder to get rid of things, but the color grading, the initial development process that I showed from the onset is very similar. So if you're already, again, used to even doing stuff on a phone, adjusting your photos, you'll be able to take those same ideas and just understand the terminology and get into the post-processing on the video side. Okay, so I'm gonna look at this one here. Okay, so this Blackmagic RAW image right here, this is a file from Blackmagic RAW. Now, if I go over to the image, I can go over here to the clip, and now I'm able to play with all these cool things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here to the color. I'm just going to keep this all raw. So this is what it would look like raw. This is how it just comes in, raw image. So you can see it's a bit flatter. It doesn't look exactly like but that camera raw idea. Now what I do is I go to clip, and now I can say, hey, you know what? Maybe I made some mistakes. So maybe the white balance, I want it to be for fluorescent. Maybe there's fluorescent lights there. Maybe it was cloudy outside. As shot is as shot, 5600 Kelvin in that idea. But what is it? What should it be? So we can always change that. Now I can go into the ISO. Maybe it should have been 200 ISO or 400 ISO, right? So, making it a bit brighter. So it's like, okay, so I'm just, all of a sudden this camera raw is really like a metadata. And that's the cool thing about post-processing video. Just like with the camera raw photo, is Blackmagic RAW, this format allows me to do that kind of manipulation. So I can, highlight recovery, I can apply a LUT of different sorts. What is that? And then again, here I can just change the color temperature, so I can make it a bit warmer, a bit cooler, whatever I want. I can play with the tints. Do I want a little magenta tint? And here's the overall exposure. So you can see these are the same kind of tools that we just used in the last set in Affinity Photo, and we're now using it here in the video side. Saturation. Just like that, we're black and white. Saturation, can put a lot of contrast, and we got this high contrast black and white image. I can put just a little bit of saturation. I can make it, there's like a hint of color, and make this a bit darker, and play with it like that. White level, so it brings up the overall white level at the top, so it's kind of increasing the highlights. Black level, I can go really low and crush the blacks, as it's called. And that's it. That's like my first step. I can do something like this. So let's go the other way and say, okay, let's make it like super saturated. So you can see it's kind of like orange. Okay. And then we go into our color tool here. And here we have all these wonderful additional tools. So it's very similar to what we just did in Affinity Photo, but we get a little bit more of these color wheels. And that's what's really cool about this software, is that it lets us do these curves, so we can play just like we did the curve in the Affinity Photo. So, if we want to bring the midtones up a little bit. And then we play with, basically we have lift, gamma, gain. Think of the gamma as the mid-tones. That's usually more of the subject, so the skin tones, the mid-tones. Gain is more about the highlights, so the brightest parts of the image. Lift is more about the darkest parts of the image. That's just kind of a rough thinking idea. Now, if we think there's too much of one color, we just need to pull it to the other direction. So for example, he's looking a bit orange, so I can just pull over to the little bit bluer, and it's going to take down the orange. You can see getting it into like that. But I put also, there's a lot of saturation, so it's kind of a bit of a fight there. But you can see we're slowly kind of balancing out what his skin tone will look like. So that's really nice. We can take some of the saturation away if we want. And we're just, how do we make this kind of a balanced image? We can put, less contrast. We can make it really bright, right? So we're just playing around with what we want to do. We can also then bring up the black areas, like so. We can make it, very flat. We can also make it a little bit more contrast like this. And just kind of offsetting and trying to neutralize things. And that's it. So there we go. That's the kind of our image, post-processed image. And, then we can look at, what we want to do with this further. We can do some sharpening and we can do some different effects. So I'll just take it back here to the edit area. So here we can, we can always do some additional effects. So we can take that, we can start looking at kind of filtration. So look at this, we can put things like, let's put on something that's fun. Here's like a vignette. So here's the vignette, right? And then I go under effects. I can say, okay, what kind of size do we want? Something like this. Less soft, more soft, right? We can make it a real spotlight, right? So that's that kind of Instagram filter, right? So again, how do we play with this kind of idea, right? So softness, transparency, we can put some, like a bit of we can change the color of this as well. So let's say that, and then we can, have more of a brown kind of halo around it. That could look pretty neat, right? So that's great. And that's how we can work with that idea. So different effects like that. We can also, go really intense and pencil sketch, and that can look really cool too. Really quick ways to do this kind of post-processing. So I'm just gonna get rid of that, Command Z, get rid of that one. And we can also just get rid of any vignettes. I can just throw those into the trash can and turn that off. We can, zoom in, we can reposition things. So this is a quick way to fix things. So let's say I don't want maybe something on the side of the wall. I can just zoom in a little bit. So for example, if, I don't want, this plate or something, I don't want that specifically. Let's say there's another person's head or hand was there by accident. We can zoom in a little bit and then move the shot to the side. So that's another great way to post-process and make things work. And, work with the tools that are available. So again, in our color tool, you can see there's this parade. This shows us the red, green, and blue. So we can see, it's kind of more blue right now than on the warm side. So that's telling me it's a little bit bluer, and you can see that it does look a little bit bluer, so that's fine. And then again, here's kind of what the raw image was before. That kind of idea, like the before and after. This is what, the raw shot footage looks like. And this is what it looks like once we do all the post-processing work. And again, helping to fix it, we're, working on the pre-development. So again, under edit, go to image, choose the shot in your timeline that you want to work with. Then I'm going to image, decode using clip, and then I can do all this post-processing work right here. And then I can further post-process in the color tab and do the more advanced color processing there as well. So it kind of keeps going from there, a couple steps. Very similar to Affinity. So remember, in Affinity, we take the photo in, we develop it, we do things with it, then we say, click the develop button, it develops it, then we can do further filtration, color manipulation, post-processing there. So it's kind of an initial develop, here's kind of my first pass, and then I can get into some more effects and more manipulation after. And again, remember, nothing The original RAW, Blackmagic RAW video file is untouched. This is just done in the software, so I can start again. Nothing is baked in. And that's the beauty of working in Blackmagic RAW. If you work in something like a ProRes, or you have what's called the lookup tables baked in, that's the same thing as if you're doing photos just with JPEG and it has the colors baked in. You can still do some manipulation, but it's a lot harder because you don't get that pre-development or that image development phase where you can really do some changes in the exposure and you have more latitude to work with. You're going to start to get a little bit stuck with, if something's blown out already, or if something's too dark, it's going to start to bring in noise or make things, it's harder to work with and to balance out. So I highly recommend using the Camera RAW for photography and Blackmagic RAW for video, or any kind of RAW formats that are available in your cameras, and then working in post-processing in those materials. The other way, you can still apply the same kind of tools. It's not that different, but you're really just going to be working on it in the color tab. So you just be doing post-processing in the color tab here, and then in Affinity, you just be working directly in the layers and adjustment layers versus doing any kind of pre-development. So that's basically the ideas there. I'm just going to get out of this software now and go back to the slides here. So yeah, if there's any kinds of questions or anything, here again, just to kind of overview, the post-processing for video is also known as color grading. Using software such as Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve allows you to do this, and it's something, I've just been touching on some of the few highlights here. We have a lot of more videos. You can go to our YouTube channel, check out the additional color grading and post-processing videos there that we've presented so far. It's something that you keep learning and discovering new things. It doesn't just end. So, you start with some of these basics, and then you're constantly learning. I'm always learning new things every time I get into the software. And that's the fun thing, that the possibilities are endless. The creative possibilities are endless, and the creative solutions that you can digitally fix and digitally manipulate are endless as well. So there's really no end to what can be done and what you can learn. And you're going to find you learn new things all the time. So don't be overwhelmed by any of this. It's just one step at a time, playing with it, essentially playing with it, getting familiar with the software and the keys and the terminology, just getting familiar with it. Don't worry, anything goes wrong, your data is still there. That raw photo is never touched, the raw video is never touched. It's just being manipulated, but the original is still there. So it's really great. If you have any questions, you can email me, tom@tbmcs.ca. Happy to answer questions, provide information, advice, further discussions. And yeah, we'll keep the conversation going. So once again, I want to thank all our partners in this project. We have the Canada Council for the Arts. We have our library partners, Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, Wasaga Beach Public Library. And at all three of those libraries, that's where you can access the digital arts computers. So we have iMacs loaded with the Affinity Photo, Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve Studio. And you can also access the digital arts equipment. So we have a Canon 6D DSLR camera that you can use to shoot raw photos. That's available at all three libraries. And at Wasaga Beach Public Library and Blue Mountains Public Library, we have the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K that lets you shoot Blackmagic RAW. So do check those out, and I hope to see you again soon in our next session. Have a great rest of the day, and remember, you can rewatch this and go over all the techniques and concepts we discussed. So feel free to give me a shout by email, and I will see you at the next workshop. All the best, and take care.